Please teach us.
Okay, Rosh Hashiva and Tzaddikim. Here we go. Continuing with the theme of Shabbos. David, just stop me when you want to, when you need to. Okay.
Dedication.
Okay. It's dedication for the protection and safety of all the Jews in the Ukraine, so that no harm should befall them, and the ones that want to come to Israel should get here safely.
Amen.
Okay. So continuing with the theme of the Mishnah Berurah on Shabbos, it says one may not lease a bathhouse to a non-Jew, since the bathhouse is known to belong to the Jew, and the non-Jew will be working there on Shabbos. Since the bathhouse would not usually be leased nor managed by an aris, a person who works for a percentage of the revenue, people would assume that the revenue belongs exclusively to the Jew, and that he hired the non-Jew for a daily wage, in which case the non-Jew is performing the work at the Jew's behest. However, one may lease a field to a non-Jew, since it is common. So it is common for a field to be managed by an aris. Therefore, even though people know that the field belongs to the Jew, they would assume that the non-Jew would be working there on percentage-based terms, and thus for his own purposes. An oven shares the status of a bathhouse. A mill shares the status of a field. Okay. Let's just finish. A mill is a measurement.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said a meal. I thought, when do I eat?
Mill, M-I-double, a mill. Okay, so a mill is like a field.
Okay. Teachers, nice to see you all.
Sorry, man. Jeez. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Sorry, man. I just had a lesson finished 30 seconds ago.
Okay. We've got a lot to cover, so let's keep the halacha short. By the way, Kevin, let's dedicate this year to all the Jews in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And please God, let the Jews escape in one place. And the Ukrainians that have never been very pleasant to the Jews, and all the Russians deal with each other.
Yeah, and protection for the Ukrainians who decent people, not the anti-Semite white trash garbage. Yeah. Those people who like us, because those do actually exist.
They are. There's about. Okay. I heard there was a million somewhere. Total, if that. I think if you could get a million together. And if you look at throughout history, they were quite complicit in helping with Jewish.
Yeah, the Nazis, Ukrainians especially.
Not just Kilniki and the Cossacks, and the Ukrainians and the Russians, both of them did a very good job at murdering and pillaging and raping and causing destruction to many communities. So my empathy levels are there for our community. Hopefully we
exactly.
And what'll be will be.
Amen.
Amen. I don't know if you guys are posh.
Yeah.
Teach us, Rav Kev.
Okay, let's just see. Okay, here we go. Okay, continuing. Okay, now it's getting a bit more interesting. So I'm just going to go. This is actually a paragraph. Shouldn't take too long. Marit Ayin. Okay, which is creating an impression that you can do a prohibited activity. Now it's discussing Marit Ayin to avoid appearances of a non-Jew working for a Jew on Shabbat. Chazal prohibited even arrangements that are not inherently subject to the prohibition of Amira La'akum, which is if an outside observer might think that the non-Jew is working for the Jew in a prohibited fashion. Therefore, there are many situations, even if an aris or a kaplan would not be allowed to work on Shabbos. Those are different types of employees or who you contract to work for you. The point is contingent on many particulars, and only the general concept is set forth here. Non-Jew may not perform work for a Jew in public if people are aware that this work is being done for a Jew, unless it is clear that the non-Jew is working in the context of a halakhically permitted arrangement. It is important to distinguish between work that is prohibited as an inherent form of Amir al-Akum and work that is prohibited just because of Marit Ayin. Since the prohibitions that are only due to Marit Ayin are treated more leniently in certain ways. For example, if a non-Jew did work for a Jew in a manner that is inherently subject to the prohibition of Amir al-Akum, for example, Malacha was done by a Sachir, type of contractor, the Jew may not benefit from the product of that work even after the fact. But if a non-Jew did work that was prohibited only because of Marit Ayin, for example, an Aris performed work publicly that would ordinarily be done by a Sachir, the Jew may benefit from the work. Moreover, arrangements that are prohibited only because of Marit Ayin are sometimes permitted in order to prevent financial loss, whereas work that is inherently prohibited would never be permitted even if a significant final loss were involved. Okay.
All right. Well done, Kev. All right. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of revision because on the date that we did it, we were all exhausted. It was about a week ago. So it was an issue that Kevin brought up, and he was talking about maturity of an animal, specifically sexual maturity from an endocrinological level, about what happens if you're having a young animal and it grows into an animal capable of breeding, and an animal that's necessarily worth more because its ability, A, to breed, and B, because its meat is worth more being fully mature. And I said to Kevin, we are going to get to that issue. And this is one of the problems about how we assess when an animal is stolen. Because we say, from the perspective of a thief, that at the end of the day, the owner of, we generally have a concept where we pay for damage that occurs now. We don't pay for future damage. And we learned that if one ox gores another and there's a fetus, we don't pay for what that fetus is worth fully grown because it might have died of disease and not reached its potential. So there's that issue about we don't pay for the future value. So we say, do we actually make sure that you pay for the damage at the time the thief stole it, because that was the value when he stole it? In other words, that was the actual timeline at the time. Or do we say that at the end of the day, the thief stealing the lamb and only having to pay for it at the date of court means that the thief is actually paying for that additional weight, etc., and additional development, which is fair because he stole it? Or do we say it's a bit unfair for the thief because he never stole a mature animal, and in fact, if he abused it and neglected it and let it die, he wouldn't have had to pay penalties based on this additional weight? So in other words, are we punishing the thief for looking after the animal? Because if you make him pay penalties on the extra weight accrued through natural development, why wouldn't he want to half slaughter it and beat it and abuse it and work it to death and get his maximum out of it? Because then he's paying the lower weight. If he looked after it and he fed it properly and it's developed now, he's now paying that extra weight in the penalty factor multiple times. So these are issues to consider. It's also an issue to consider, well, why should the original owner be depleted of value if a thief sold it, slaughtered it at a greater value because it grew? How's it the owner's fault? Or you could say that the original owner got back what he paid for it. He didn't lose out. So these are some of the issues at play, Kevin, to answer your question. And we're going to deal with these issues now. Am I making sense to you guys so far? Okay. So Rav Illa said if one stole a lamb and it matured into a ram, and if you look at that particular statement, the maturity process takes 13 months and 1 day. Now, obviously, if you say, well, why doesn't it take 13 months and 4 days? Maybe the animal's a slow starter, or maybe it takes 12 months and 2 days. Why do we get specifically 13 months and 1 day? And the reason being is halachically, you have to have a point at which things have parameters. In other words, it doesn't mean the animal will mature necessarily on that date, but that's your safety mechanism, that the average animal has reached full maturity by that particular period of time. You might have an exceptional animal, but that is the norm, barring the odd anomaly. Does that make sense? So we base the law on the norm, not on the odd anomaly. So as far as a lamb to a ram is concerned, it's 13 months and 1 day to reach sexual maturity. At that point, it undergoes physical changes, I think analogous to puberty in humans, you could say. And then that's as far as the lamb is concerned. But if he stole a calf and it matured into an ox, okay, you've got the same sort of issue. The timeline is a little different, though. That sexual maturity occurs at the age of 2 years and 1 day. So, you're basically having 11 months extra as regards a calf to an ox. But in any event, when you're talking about the maturation of something someone stole, being a lamb to a ram or a calf to an ox, if it has undergone a physical change in the thief's possession, he has thereby acquired it. Okay, so what do we mean? We mean that the law is that if a thief steals something which then undergoes a significant physical change, the stolen property becomes his. So before you say, hang on a second, why is he entitled to keep the stolen item? He stole it. We're not saying he's entitled to not reimburse or make monetary compensation according to what it was worth at the time he stole it. But the actual animal itself, or the actual article itself, becomes the thief's because it's changed its physical dynamic where it's no longer recognizable as the original. But the thieves, either way, would have to make monetary compensation for breaking the law and taking what he was not entitled to take. But we assess the worth when he stole it. Okay? Now, the question arises then, if he slaughters it, or if he sells it, the thief is not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, according to Ravila, because it is the thief's animal that he's slaughtering, and it's his animal that he's selling. In other words, it's as if he slaughtered or stole a different animal from the one that he stole. Does that make sense? So to just deal with this sort of concept, Rav Ella said if it doesn't even resemble the animal which he stole, and it's a different animal completely, in other words, you would never recognize it's the same, he's not entitled. He then takes possession of the new changed animal. He has to make restitution at what that animal was worth at the time that he stole it, so the original owner doesn't lose out. But he's not liable to the fourfold or fivefold penalty for slaughtering or selling it. Now, the concept underlying the thief's legal acquisition of the stolen article through change is that the Torah obligates the thief to return the stolen article itself if it's still in existence, or if its value is no longer existent. But if it undergoes a change of physicality, it's then considered to be transformed into something different. In other words, if it hasn't changed, your first priority as a thief is to give back the original article. If it's no longer in existence because you drank it, you sold it, you slaughtered it, you smashed it, you have to give that sort of value. Okay? Now, once it undergoes a physical change, it's considered transformed into something different. I'll give you an example. You take wood, and then you're a craftsman, but you're a thieving craftsman, and you make it into a chair. Then it's not considered the original wood, right? But it's like a new and different item. It's a chair. So when a stolen article undergoes a change of that nature, the original is no longer considered in existence, and the thief can't return the article itself, but what that would have been in value at the time when he stole it. Pretty straightforward. Now, any thoughts that you guys have so far on Rav Ila? Gavin said it sounded unusual last time, I think. Gav? Sorry?
I don't remember what I said.
Okay, but looking at it, it sounds logical so far. It doesn't sound.
I don't remember.
And you're on new medication now, Gav, so I think you're feeling better. And you can see it's reasonably logical so far. But obviously in the Gemara there's always an objection. Did you guys want to say something, or can I continue? I'm listening. Okay. So there's an objection from Rav Chanina, and he challenged Rav Ila from a different brisa. He says, look, we've got a brisa here that says if one stole a lamb and it matured into a ram, he stole a calf and it matured into an ox, he pays the twofold payment and the fourfold or fivefold payment according to the animal's value when he stole it. In other words, actually, if you look at the ruling of the brisa that the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payments are paid according to the animal's value at the time of the original theft, it does seem to contradict Rav's ruling, because if you remember that Rav did say originally that those payments are made according to the stolen article's value at the time the thief is sued in court. But we're going to raise the difficulties of why this brisa seems to contradict Rav and why it wasn't brought before. But just in your mind, leave that out of it. Just consider Rav Chanina's challenge. So if Rav Ila is saying, listen, it's changed form. So now that it's changed form, it's acquired by the thief. The thief has to make financial restitution for the principal at the time that he stole it, but he doesn't have to pay a fourfold or fivefold payment because it's no longer the animal that physically resembles what he stole. So it becomes a thief's now in terms of property. Rav Chanina is saying, no, I've read a different brisa where if one stole a lamb and it matured into a ram, and he stole a calf and it matured into an ox, he does pay the twofold payment, fourfold or fivefold, according to the animal's value when he stole it. Now, Rav Chanina said, if it should enter your mind to say that the thief acquired the animal with this change, why does he pay the fourfold or fivefold payment altogether? You know, because it is the thief's animal that he's slaughtering. It's the thief's animal that he's selling. Does that make sense? So it's a question contradicting Rav Ila. Does that make sense, guys?
So who's selling the thief's animal?
Okay, so you've got two positions. All he's saying is, look, Rav Ila is saying that when an animal undergoes a physical change, it's now acquired by the thief. If somebody stole an animal and it underwent puberty, for example, and it fully matured, the thief acquired it. He doesn't get to pay nothing. He has to pay back the financial equivalent, but that animal changed under his care, and therefore
it's not the same.
Acquired the rights for it because it's not the same. So therefore, if he decides to slaughter or sell it, it's the thief's animal. He shouldn't pay the full fivefold payment. That's what he's saying. He's already made restitution at the time that he stole it back to the principal for the original owner, but the full fivefold payment falls away. Or if it's a donkey, you could say a twofold payment falls away because the animal's changed its possession completely. And we learned that it now is considered a different animal from the one he stole. So he has acquired it. Does that make sense?
So the penalty still has to relate to the what's it called? You still have to value it at what the animal, even though it's increased in value, what it would have been worth if you hadn't increased in value. And that's it. The penalty has to be based on that.
Gavin, I can hardly hear you. Can you try and see if you could?
The sound's not so clear.
You really do want to. Explain it again.
Oh, speaker I had. Can you hear me now?
It's still got that like reverberation.
What's going on here with this?
Yeah, and like sort of like a echo, not an echo.
Maybe too loud.
That's better. That's slightly better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a bit better.
Better. I think it might have been too loud. Maybe I didn't realize it.
All right, so explain what you were saying, Gab. I'm listening.
I'm just putting it back down. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I feel like I'm at the audiologist, yeah?
Oh, yeah. So I've got to monitor this audio. So it can't go over with the mic. Listen, what I was saying is that, yes, if it's transformed, okay, I understand his logic. You're saying it's transformed into something else if you don't have to pay the penalty. So firstly, that's incredibly unfair. You know, it's incredibly unfair on the guy who the property was stolen from. Number one, hear me out. And then number two, surely you base the penalty not based on the increased value, based on the value at the time of the court date. You know, or at the value at the beginning, whichever one you take, but it's not going to be the value of the increase. So therefore, you're still going to pay a penalty regardless, even if it has changed for.
Okay, so let's address your question. You brought up three different issues. Two actually specifically. Is that these issues will be addressed and unfolded, but in principle, he wouldn't pay the penalty. Rav said that the principal is paid at the time of the theft, and the penalty is paid at the time that the thief is sued in court. And if, for example, when he sued at court 1 or 2 months earlier, he happened to eat the animal, slaughter and eat it, or sell it, or whatever the case may be, he pays at the time where that animal physically underwent a change. Either a change of ownership, Gavin, or a change in status from being alive to dead. So that proves that when there's a change of status, that is when payments can be made. So the reason why we're saying that the principal is paid at the time when it's stolen is that's what the animal represented in terms of its look and weight and sexual maturity at the time when it was stolen. So as long as the original owner got it back, he's not out of pocket. Just bear that in mind a sec. As far as the penalty is concerned, Rav Illa would agree that if there was a price fluctuation where the animal hadn't physically changed in terms of sexual maturity, that penalty would be due of the fourfold or fivefold payment at the time he's sued in court. But what he's saying is we've learned that in Bava Metzia, we learn that when an article makes a physical change, like if a thief steals wood and makes it into a chair, it no longer resembles the same sort of item. So, for example, in that case, and maybe even in this case, the twofold payment would be due. Let me give you an example. I steal wood. I make it into a chair. I'm a craftsman. You know this is all fiction. You wouldn't hand me tools because I'd end up injuring myself. But let's say I was a craftsman. So now I would pay Gavin for the wood, Kev. I'd pay Gavin for the wood. And I'd also pay him a penalty twofold for stealing an inanimate object. So that I'd owe him 100 zuz for the wood if it was worth 100 zuz. And I'd pay him 100 zuz penalty, which is equivalent to the principal, at the time that I stole it. Now, if I made a particularly expensive chair, Gavin would get the twofold penalty. So there is a discussion that says that Rav Illa would understand that there might be a twofold penalty because, in principle, even if you took an inanimate object, you'd still have to pay back what it was worth at the time when you stole it. So, for example, if the calf was worth 100 zuz and it matured into an ox that was worth 400 zuz, he would pay the principal of 100 zuz and he'd pay the twofold penalty at another 100 zuz. The question is, why doesn't he turn around and say, well, you owe at the time that you stole it, a fourfold or fivefold. If you still have a principle of a fourfold or fivefold, it's just you make it at the point at which you stole it at the lower weight level. You get what I'm saying? So we are going to discuss these ideas, but you've got to give it time to unfold, if you don't mind. So all Rav Ila is saying is that when it changes the physical properties, it now is acquired. It's no longer the object he stole. Therefore, since he's paid the principal back at the, as far as that's concerned, he now owns it. And any sort of sale or slaughtering, he doesn't pay a penalty on the thief. Rav Chanina says it doesn't make sense because I found a different brisa that turns around and says that if a lamb matures into a ram and a calf matures into an ox, he pays the twofold payment and fourfold or fivefold according to the animal's value when he stole it. And Gavin, those were the magic words, when he stole it. Okay? So he said, now, if it should enter your mind to say that the thief acquires the animal with this change, why would this brisa turn around and say he would have to pay the fourfold or fivefold payments altogether? Because according to Rav Ila, it's the thief's animal that he's slaughtering or selling. So this brisa is contradicting Rav Ila. That's what Rav Chanina is saying. So now we're waiting for an answer from Rav Ila. So Rav Ila would retort and say that this change doesn't acquire it for the thief. What does he mean? This change does not acquire it for the thief? It basically means that we'll see now. It means that if the brisa rules that the thief pays according to the animal's value when he stole it, let him pay according to its worth now. So what Rav Ila is saying in terms of criticism to Rav Chanina is the brisa doesn't disagree with me. It might say you owe a four or fivefold payment, but it does say that it's paid according to the time that he stole it, which means it's acknowledging a pre-change assessment at the time of the theft, not once it reaches sexual maturity. So this brisa, Rav Ila says to Rav Chanina, is not a proof for you, because then why, if it says the fourfold or fivefold payment, would it take less from the thief? Because it's actually increased in value as a result of sexual maturity and gaining weight. So why wouldn't you make sure the original owner paid the higher amount? Because the original owner was deprived of it, unless that physical change is acknowledged. And it is acknowledged because your brisa says you only pay back at the time you stole it, not at the time where the physical change took place. Do you understand what I'm saying? So he's arguing against Rav Chanina. So I was wondering if you, Kevin, or Arthur could give it back to me. See if you understand it.
Nobody else? No, I know I'm on that medicine, but I take part in it.
Okay.
All right. So no, I can try. So I don't know who to rap. No, I'm not strong enough today. Damon, just go on. I'll only do on David. I'm super strong.
All right. Can I do a 3 or 4 sentence review on it and then go on?
I'll probably get it not 100% right. I'll rather you. Let's save time. You do it. All right.
Okay, Kev. Can you give it over at the moment? All right. So Kevin, this is what we say. Bottom line, Rav Ila is turning around and says when an animal reaches sexual maturity, it's equivalent of taking wood and turning it into a chair. It no longer resembles the same creature which the thief stole. And therefore, if it's made that sort of change, yes, he has to make restitution, but he doesn't have to give the original animal back. It's not the same animal. So he pays back the principal, and he doesn't have to pay a 4 or 5-fold payment because the animal is, the thief has acquired it through the change. Okay? We learned that in Bava Kamma. So he was saying there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. That's number one. Now, Rav Chanina is saying, I don't know what you're talking about, because I've got a different brisa that says that if the animal goes from a lamb to a ram or a calf to an ox, you pay the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment at the time when the thief stole it. So Rav Ila, this Bryce is criticizing your logic, because in fact you do pay the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment. Now, that's what Rav Chanina says to Rav Ila. Now, Rav Ila hears this, and he hones in on one thing. He pay at the time that he stole. And he's saying, listen, why are you making the thief pay at the time that he stole, unless you're acknowledging that after the point that he stole it, the physical change takes place? Because if the thief no longer owns, if the thief owns it now, the actual animal itself, and only has to make financial restitution on the principal, or even if you're saying the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment at the time of theft, you're acknowledging that why are you making it at the time of theft? Because the animal has changed status. And therefore, why doesn't your brisa say you make the payments of the careful payment, the penalty payments, at the time of the court date? Because it's worth more to the original owner. The animal has gained weight. It's now fit for breeding, and it's worth maybe instead of 100 zuz, 400 zuz. So the fact that you make sure that the penalties are paid at the time that it's stolen is proving my case that the animal, when it undergoes physical change, the thief keeps it. Otherwise, you would assess the animal's worth at the time of the court hearing, not at the time when he stole it, which is a good point. So at that point, then they can only be arguing on a certain difference. Is Rav Chanina would basically say, yes, then maybe physical change has taken place, but then you still have to pay a penalty, but maybe not a penalty on the increased weight. In other words, just like if you stole something at the time, you're not off the hook with a penalty, which is what Gavin said, very smart, is Rav Chanina would say, well, you're not off the hook with a penalty. Why would you be? You still stole it. Maybe you just pay what the scrawny animal was worth prepubescently. Do you get what I'm saying? Which is a point Gavin raised earlier on, which I thought was good. So Gavin, well done on that. So we're just going to go on for a few minutes. Now, Rav Chanina responds to Rav Ila. The reason he does not pay in accordance with the value the animal has now is that the thief can say to him, did I steal an ox from you? Did I steal a ram from you? Okay. Now, I just want to explain what that means, because if you read it on superficial value, it doesn't really make any sense. What does it mean, did I steal an ox from you? Did I steal a ram from you? What Rav Chanina is arguing about here is that the animal's natural development from a lamb to a ram, or from a calf to an ox, doesn't constitute a change that should free the thief from liability for subsequently slaughtering or selling it. There can be no fourfold or fivefold penalty for the additional ram or ox element, since that additional element was not part of the original theft, which is integral to the thief's liability for slaughter or theft. So it's exactly the case where Rav Chanina is saying, right, you're still eligible to a penalty, but not that extra weight, because that extra weight has developed. Does that make sense? So, and he also argues that the animal's natural development doesn't constitute a change that should free the thief from liability. Well, there are two reasons. Is because the thief committed an avera, that's number one, of theft. So you don't acquire things when you break the law, by the way. It's not like finding a lost article, Gavin. Do you get what I'm saying? So that it's not like finding a little lamb and it became a ram. You didn't, and then you found out who the owner is. Here you're actually breaking the law. So why are you entitled to keep something that was never yours? So that's one issue that's going to come up. The other issue that's going to come up is physical change in terms of natural development considered an acquisition by the thief? Because if we use the example that is used in Bava Kamma of wood and a chair, the thief took the wood and made it into a chair. It was his contribution that enabled the object to change its status. Just like in the case when we were talking about Rabbah and Rav, that when an animal is overfed by the thief's not entitled to pay that extra weight the animal gained, not within the scope of its natural development, but because of the thief's participation in creating that extra weight. I'm not talking about the normal feeding, I'm talking about excessive feeding. So in that case, the thief has to contribute to a certain extent, according to certain opinions, in a chain, not a thief, a person, in order for a change to be rendered as an acquisition. In other words, if the animal sexually matures, irrespective of whether you're there as a custodian or a thief or whatever or not, you haven't done anything to aid that process other than feed the animal. It is a natural physiological development. Does that make sense? And because it's a natural development, there's an opinion that says, well, that doesn't affect acquisition. And another opinion says, well, you still fed it, and it would have died had you not, so therefore you did contribute. Albeit not had control over the endocrinology, you certainly fed it to prevent, and you could have, by not feeding it, prevented that development. Therefore, it's a contribution in and of itself. Then the issue becomes, is theft then allowed to acquire acquisition? Okay, so far, all we are saying is that Rav Chanina is saying that while we make the person pay at the time of the theft is because that extra weight gain is not paid from by the thief. He only pays originally what he stole, and a penalty based on the original weight of the animal. Does that make sense? Which is fair, Gavin. He's paying a penalty back, but based on the time that he stole it. Now, Rav Ella retorts to him, may the merciful one spare us from such an illogical argument. Guys didn't hold back, did they? So what he says is, Rav Ella is basically saying that, listen, if the change aspect in the animal is significant enough to be considered as distinct from the original stolen article, by the fact that we actually deem the value at the time of the theft and not at the time when the animal was slaughtered, sold, or at the court date, if it's that distinct that you have to basically acknowledge that the repayment of both the penalty and the principal is done at the time when the animal was stolen, because it looks completely distinct from how it developed from the original stolen article, then by the same token, it's significant enough that the thief shall be deemed to have acquired the animal with regard to not being liable altogether for subsequent slaughtering or selling it. Saying if you actually want to acknowledge, Gavin, there's a significant change, okay, then you can't pay double rules. You're saying you're saying that the thief mustn't pay the extra weight, but he mustn't pay the extra weight because the animal doesn't resemble what it was. So you say that, and then you're saying that, well, then there is a physical change that is significant. That's why we only take the time of theft as the time point of repayment in principle. And therefore, how can you pay a double game and say that physical change doesn't affect acquisition when it's a physical change that's allowing you to only pay at the time of the theft? It's got a good point. Okay, so then obviously Rav Chanina counters the same to him. He said, on the contrary, may the merciful one spare us from your illogical argument. So what he's basically saying is Rav Chanina holds that the two matters are not interdependent. In other words, the animal can be deemed changed with regard to there being no fourfold or fivefold penalty for the changed portion of the animal, yet not changed with regard to the thief remaining liable for slaughtering or selling the original portion of the animal. Which makes sense, because what Rav Chanina is actually saying is, why should you be off the hook? Because the animal's developed that you don't have to make any penalty. If you say there's a change enough significant, I'd say fine, it's significant enough that you're not paying on the added weight. We'll give that to you, Mr. Thief. But what we're not going to do is get you off the hook where you don't have to pay a penalty, because originally, even if you stole an inanimate object, you would have had to pay a penalty back on the original theft. So then let's make the penalty a 4 or 5-fold based on the animal's original weight as an infant. Because why should you get off the penalty portion apart from the principal? And that makes sense. All right, guys, I think I've cooked your brain enough. You all look stuffed. Arthur, you want to come on the camera for a second? You guys all look cooked.
We were cooked way before.
Yeah, now, obviously, Rabbi Goldstein is speaking at the moment, Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein. I'm sure you're all going to join. And guys, thank you for a share.
Sure.
I hope it made sense to you. It made sense to me. Thank Hashem.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, guys, we covered a bit of pace, eh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, cool. Keep well. Gone to the new portion because we want to cover a little bit of ground. So the Gemara now raises an objection to the ruling that the thief does not acquire the animal when it develops from a lamb to a ram. So Rav Zera objected to it. Because what's Rav Zera's objection? He said, let the thief acquire the animal via having undergone a change in name. Okay? So when I first read this, I thought to myself, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why? Because I can say to you, water is mayim, water is water, it's butter, it's whatever you call it. It doesn't change what the water is. It's H2O. You're just describing water. But what do you mean a name change, Kevin? What do you mean a name change would actually change, be considered a physical change? How does that even relate? Do you know what I'm saying? It's a name. It's just, Kevin, it's a...
Half to an adult? Half to an adult? Name change?
No. What I'm saying, Gavin, is if you think about the issue deeply on first reflection, you can call it a calf, you can call it a ox, you can call it a lamb, you can call it a ram. At the end of the day, if I call water H2O, I call it water or mayim or whatever I call it, it's still water, but it's still wet. Your description is irrelevant to its actual properties. It's the name we give it. So I was thinking about this, and I'm saying it doesn't really change the nature. So when I thought about it more deeply, we have to say that it does in one respect. In a legal context, what I mean in a legal context, if I want to be part of the Kupat Cholim and get the healthcare in Israel, I have to make aliyah. Now, have I changed physically as a result of getting a document? No. Am I allowed in the country and getting a benefit if I don't have the document? No. So though physical change hasn't taken place, the citizenship in terms of which country I belong to, which is just a name, by the way, has a whole lot of legal ramifications. It doesn't mean that the physical name is enough. All it does is it changes the legal status. That's what Rav Zera is saying, is that the minute you say somebody turns 18, they can get the death penalty for murder. You get what I'm saying? They're no longer a minor. So he said, let the thief acquire the animal via its undergoing a change in name. So in other words, even if an item doesn't undergo physical change, it becomes designated by a different name. It's legally no longer considered the same item that was stolen. So the thief thereby acquires the stolen article and is thereafter required to pay the owner only its value, not the changed article itself, only the value. So Rav Zera therefore asked that, granted that the physical transformation, maybe from a lamb to ram, on its own doesn't constitute a physical change because it's the animal's natural development. The thief, apart from feeding it, didn't actually, like a piece of wood, carve it into a chair. But if it does have a change in legal status, that should be enough. That's the way Rashi describes it. So Rava said, an ox, even on the day that it's born, is called an ox. A ram, even on the day that it's born, is called a ram. Meaning that even the term ram and ox as legal terms, they technically only refer to like mature rams or oxen, sexually developed animals. It's common speech. And in addition to that, if you look at this, Rav's using sources from the Chumash to prove it, because he says, an ox, even on the day it is born, is called an ox, as it said, an ox or a lamb or a goat when it is born. In other words, he's quoting from Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 22, verse 27, that even that it's talking about like an ox on the day it's born. It's using the word shur, the adult version of an ox. So that's the quote from Leviticus. So if you have a look, it's doing the same thing with the ram, because it says a ram even on the day that it's born is called a ram. And what's the source? There's a source in Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 31, verse 38, which says, "And the rams of your flocks I did not eat." Now, can you say that it's only rams that Jacob did not eat, but lambs he did eat? Rather, you must not derive from that a ram on the day that is born is called a ram. Indeed, it must. In other words, what it's saying is this was a case when Yaakov worked for 20 years as a shepherd for his father-in-law, Lavan, right? At the end of the 20 years, his father-in-law just accused him of theft. And he fled with his families and possessions. And when they finally had an altercation, he accused him of stealing his idols. And Jacob was offended by the accusation. And he said, "I'm innocent." And in the course of his 20 years, he'd worked for Lavan as a shepherd. He never once ate any of Lavan's rams. So when he used the word rams, it didn't only include adults, it included small lambs. Because if it had only included adult lambs, but Yaakov ate Lavan's lambs, he would have been a thief. And Yaakov never stole. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if it meant only mature animals, and Yaakov said he never ate the mature animals, but without permission he ate and slaughtered a baby lamb, etc., it would have meant he stole the lamb without permission. But the very fact that he used the term ram means he never stole a thing, whether it was a baby lamb or whether it was an adult ram. He never took anything he wasn't entitled to. So that's proof that when he used that term, that general holistic term, he meant whether baby or adult. So whether we have the source in Genesis, Bereshit, or Leviticus, what's Leviticus in Hebrew, Kevin?
Vayikra.
So I was right when I said Vayikra.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to end off. So those are the sources.
Okay, the sauces, when you slaughter it, it'll be tomato sauces or barbecue sauces.
It will. That's very funny.
Sorry, Damon, geez, I'm just tired. I don't know, I realized I dozed off. I had a good, so at least it wasn't for too long. Gavin, apologize. It was just sorry for the confusion. I didn't put it, it's all good, eh? Or you,
no. But it's all good. I can't hit you from here. It's too far. So nothing I can do.
Pretend you're in the Dion's, Gavin. You got an old TV screen there. Remember Dion City Store? Just knock over an old monitor that you need to trash anyway. Have you got one there?
I've got lots of old printers underneath my desk here. I'll just throw one of those.
But you know what, Gavin, seriously, take those old printers. There's a place in YQ. When I was in South Africa, they pay you per kilo, like R1 a kilogram. I took like 30 kgs of old printers and old screens. And at least, if you've got old stuff, just try to get from people and you make a bit of money.
Yeah, I must actually look for a place like that. I have got a few things.
It's in Weinberg. It's not far from you. It's such a pleasure.
It's something, yeah.
They take the motherboards, they export the motherboards to Germany and to Europe. They take that's what they do. They actually, it's not just the dust that they crush it with. It's in Weinberg. It's near OQ. It's near the old national flag, I think. Near there, not around the corner from there.
I'll have a look, because I do have a few things. I can't do it.
Yeah, get old printers, computers, electronic stuff, and core cables. Just